In Game of Thrones, one of Robb Stark's biggest blunders during the War of Five Kings was the failed alliance with the Ironborn. During the war, Robb expresses a need for ships so that he can better attack the Lannisters. However, in his pursuit of this deal, he underestimates Balon Greyjoy's desire for revenge against his family after his own failed rebellion from years ago, and he overestimates Theon's loyalty to the Northern cause as his best friend. So when he sends him home in hopes that he'll get ships in return, instead of getting a new ally in this fight against the Lannisters, he gains a new enemy that throws a pretty big wrench into his war effort. The North is invaded, his best friend captures his family home, his brothers are displaced, and to some are even believed dead. In one move, Robb loses his seat of power, and his position as king in the North is put into question. This even gives the Boltons an opportunity to strike the Starks and wound them further down the line. But what if none of this happened? In a previous video, I tackled what might have happened if Theon, instead of betraying Robb, decided to stay loyal. But what if in this timeline, the whole of the Iron Islands and the Greyjoy family supported the Northern cause for independence? How could something this monumental come about, and more importantly, how would the story change as a result? The main thing or person that we need to tackle to make this possible timeline a reality is the one who started it all, Balon Greyjoy. He has a long-standing hatred for House Stark after what they did to him during the Greyjoy Rebellion. So to make him more amiable towards the Starks and an alliance, we'll have to change a couple things about his character. For starters, we need to remove him as an enemy and deal with his desire to take over the North during the War of Five Kings. Even before Theon came home to ask for help, he was already planning the assaults of the North with so many of the Northern forces away at war with Robb. It was an act of revenge and greed more than anything else. He primarily blamed the Starks for his failed rebellion against Robert so many years ago, so why not screw them over the first chance he got and try to claim the North for himself, expanding the power and influence of the Iron Islands. In this timeline, we'll say that while Balon Greyjoy has never given up his ambition for independence, he does give up his ambition to rule the North. Even though the War of Five Kings is a pretty good opportunity to pursue his desires, he knows that taking control of the North would not be easy even with the Starks away. As Cersei once told Joffrey in Season 1, the North is just too big and too cold for outsiders to control.
The North cannot be held. Not by an outsider, it's too big and too wild. And when the winter comes, the seven gods together couldn't save you and your royal army.
Let's say Balon Greyjoy is also privy to this knowledge and smartens up about trying to take the North for his own this time. He's smart enough to see in this timeline that in the long run, he would stretch himself too thin trying to hold the place. And after the War of Five Kings is won, it's very likely that the winner is going to come after him, and that is not going to look good for him and his people. He'll get flashbacks to his rebellion against Robert, how he thought he was taking advantage of a golden opportunity, Robert's fresh reign, only to get stomped on and lose most of his sons in the process. So the idea that it could happen again makes him a bit hesitant when it comes to attacking the North. So if he's no longer trying to attack the Starks, then the second thing that I believe could persuade him to join them in the rebellion is actually his son, Theon. Now I understand that sounds really weird given that Balon really doesn't care about Theon. Theon could die at a moment's notice and it really wouldn't change anything for Balon. So I'm not really going for anything sentimental here. I'm not going to say that family bonds will persuade Balon to help the Starks this time, like Theon believed they would in canon.
I'm his only living son. He'll listen to me. I know he will.
But more so, it's the way that Theon goes about getting his father to help. In the show, Theon does a really bad job of convincing Balon. He fails to see the pride of House Greyjoy, and the way he goes about getting them to support Robb is really by implying that they serve him.
Why risk going against the North if they would be our allies? Rise up against them and they could destroy us. But if we pledge fealty to them, they'll give us Casterly Rock.
He makes it seem like the Ironborn aren't equal to the Starks, like the Starks are the only people that can give the Ironborn independence, like they owe the Starks something. And that's pretty bad because at this point, there are 4 different people claiming to be kings: Joffrey, Stannis, Renly, and Robb. There is no one stopping the Iron Islands from declaring their own independence and just going their own way. Then in the case of Robb, he doesn't have the authority to give them anything outside of the North as king in the North. So that whole deal with Robb saying that he'll give them Casterly Rock is pretty stupid. especially when they can just go after Casterly Rock themselves. Why do they need Robb's jurisdiction to do something like that? Why do they have to bend the knee to Robb? Why do they have to be subservient to him when they've never been under the rule of House Stark in the first place? Why should the Starks have a say in what they can do and what they can or cannot have? And with Theon back home, the Starks have no leverage over the Greyjoys either. So they don't owe Robb anything. The Greyjoy words are, "We do not so." So it's unsurprising that they'd be offended by Theon implying that they need a handout just to be successful. In this timeline, we'll say that Theon is aware of that, and takes a different approach to get his father's support. It's a small change, but instead of asking Balon to kneel to Robb, the lord of the house he blames for his failed rebellion, he asks Balon to stand with him instead. He recognizes Balon's pride and does his best to appeal to that. Balon still wants to be king of the Iron Islands, and Theon lets him know that Casterly Rock, with all its wealth and resources, is ripe for the taking if they help defeat the Lannisters. Something that may be a bit more appealing to Balon now, since he isn't going after the North this time. Theon also tells his father that as Ironborn, he has every right to claim his own crown, but keeping it will be hard, especially when the war is over. Even if he doesn't want to fight the Lannisters right now, it's gonna happen eventually. Or whether it's Joffrey, Stannis, or Renly, someone is going to sit the Iron Throne, and chances are they'll want to subjugate the Iron Islands once again. Last time, Balon stood alone in such a circumstance, and not only did he lose the fight, he lost his sons. But if he works with the Starks, not for them, they can defend each other, at least until they win the war in true permanent sovereignty over themselves. Then they don't have to deal with each other ever again. Who knows, maybe if Balon wants, he could take the Iron Throne for himself, like Euron wanted to do. His legacy as the man who took Casterly Rock and maybe the Iron Throne is what Theon offers him, a chance to take back his power, his greatness, albeit with unwanted allies. He appeals to the Reaver in his father. That Greyjoy pride that originally got him into trouble. So we'll say that due to Balon being a bit more sensible when it comes to his approach in this war, and Theon being more tactful in his appeal to his father, the Ironborn do decide to stand with Robb, even if it is reluctant and a means to an end. Theon would act as the main conduit of communication between Robb and Balon in this alliance, since his dad honestly wouldn't want to be near Robb and take what he perceives as orders from him. And Theon would definitely make sure to let Robb know not to treat the Ironborn like his subjects if he hopes to maintain them as allies and use their ships. This new alliance would honestly be a pretty heavy change to the story. If the Ironborn work with Robb, then this means that the North is never raided. Moat Cailin isn't taken, and since Theon remains loyal to Robb, he'll never take Winterfell. So Maester Luwin is never killed by the Ironborn, nor is Roger Cassel by Theon. Bran and Rickon won't flee far north to escape the Ironborn, and the Boltons can't take advantage of the capture and sack Winterfell either. This is pretty good because it means for the time being, Theon is spared the Reek treatment, so no quality time with Ramsay. Already we're off to a pretty good start. The first thing that I think would happen during this alliance of iron and ice is that Balon would start assaulting the coast of the Westerlands, kinda reminiscent of what he did while he was in the north. I don't think Balon would immediately go for Casterly Rock even though that's what was offered to them. Casterly Rock was literally built into a giant mountain, so taking it is easier said than done. So instead, they'll focus on things that are more manageable for them, like raiding along the coastline, going after smaller castles and holdings that should be easier for them to take and defend. And if they feel so inclined, they'll go after Lannisport, which is a very profitable port city in the Westerlands, and it wouldn't be the first time that a Greyjoy has raided the place. An ancestor of Balon Greyjoy once sacked Lannisport and destroyed a nice portion of the Lannister fleet while he was at it, so I definitely see Balon trying his best to replicate this event. He would call for Yara to carry out this action and spearhead the operation. She is his preferred heir, and she actually knows what she's doing when it comes to raiding, so why not have her raid the western coast and sack Lannisport? This would be a pretty decent move in my eyes, because it forces the Lannisters to stretch their forces and fight on multiple fronts. Not only do they have to deal with Robb in the Riverlands, the looming threat of Stannis and Renly, but now they have to deal with the Ironborn raiding along the coast and attacking profitable cities like Lannisport. Tywin would be forced to take action in this instance, and I see him sending his brother Kevin Lannister back home with some men to try and sort out the Ironborn problem while he tries to deal with Robb, who has become much more of a threat thanks to the help of the Iron Islands. And there is one particular instance in the Riverlands that I think drives this home for Tywin. If you remember, around the time Theon went back home and later betrayed the Starks, Robb was at Riverrun for the funeral of his grandfather Hoster Tully. During this time, the Riverlands were being raided and pillaged by the Mountain, and Robb made a plan to kill him. He put his uncle Edmure in charge of this, but because he didn't tell him the full plan, he went off a script he didn't even know about, and instead of killing the Mountain, he drove him away. But I don't think that's gonna happen here. After gaining his father's support, Theon would have eventually made his way back to Robb with some loyal Ironborn men at his back, and helped his friend during the war campaign. I think with Theon around, since he's basically Robb's right-hand man, he and his Ironborn will be the ones sent to take down the Mountain instead of Edmure. I'm going to say that in this timeline, Robb actually tells Theon the whole plan, since he is his best friend, and not only has he proved himself to be loyal by returning, he's also proved to be very reliable by getting Balon's help. So, Theon is tasked with taking down the Mountain, an opportunity that he is not going to pass up if it means glory for himself and his people. With knowledge of the real plan and no real reason to go off course, I believe that Theon will successfully lure the Mountain out, ambush him with the help of the Ironborn and the Northerners, and end up taking his life. This would be a pretty heavy blow to Tywin since Gregor Clegane was basically his go-to guy for anything violent. Killing Tywin's mad dog would send a message on the battlefield and give Robb and the Greyjoys more rapport as a threat, and Tywin would know that he has to be more careful when he's facing them now. Funnily though, killing the Mountain and pillaging the Westerlands aren't the only benefits the Greyjoys would offer Robb in this timeline. With more support in his war, the course of Robb's story would honestly change dramatically. With more soldiers and ships from the Iron Islands, it's actually unlikely that the Red Wedding even happens here. The only reason that this was possible is because Robb lacked allies due to poor decisions he made and was in desperate need of help. His home was taken, his brothers were missing, he killed Lord Karstark and lost half his army, and his best friend betrayed him. So he really needed the phrase if he wanted to keep fighting in the war. This desperation opened them up to a betrayal at Edmure's wedding to Rosalind, but that won't happen in this timeline. With the clear military advantage and more allies in the Ironborn, he won't feel his pressure to run back to the phrase for an alliance. He won't push Edmure to marry Rosalind and open himself up for a backstab out of desperation now. And on a really quick note, while this what if is centered around the show, I kinda wanna bring in some book lore when it comes to this what if, while we're talking about the phrase and the Red Wedding. It's just something I found interesting to think on, but if the Greyjoys had supported Robb in the books, outside of the Red Wedding, it's also very possible that Robb would have never fallen out with the phrase to begin with. In both continuities, the reason Robb falls out with them is because of his marriage. In the books, he marries this girl named Jane Westerling. He does this more so out of honor than love because he slept with her when they weren't even supposed to get married. And the only reason he really does this, sleep with Jane Westerling, is because he thinks that his brothers, Bran and Rickon, are dead thanks to Theon. But if Theon never betrayed the Starks, then it's possible that Robb never would have slept with or married Jane and spurned the phrase. So, unlike the show, if this what if was taking place in the books, then the phrase would still be allied to Robb, making him that much stronger. But I digress, this was just a random interesting thought that I had while I was making this, so moving on. Robb is still going to get married to Talisa in this timeline, and the phrase will be pretty butthurt about that. But once again, feeding into the idea that Robb's allies prevent the Red Wedding, I also don't think the Red Wedding will happen here because Robb will not lose the Karstarks. The only reason this happened is because Catelyn released Jaime. By releasing the Kingslayer, she set in motion a chain of events that doomed Robb. Rickard Karstark, feeling robbed of his vengeance, decided to kill 2 Lannister squires after Edmure's failed mission against the Mountain. This murder prompted Robb to sentence him to death and publicly execute him, which made the Karstark forces angry, so they abandoned Robb. And as I said earlier, because they abandoned Robb, he was desperate for help from the Freys, which got him killed. But once again, thanks to Theon and the Ironborn, I don't think that Catelyn will let Jaime go. The main reason that Catelyn released Jaime has to do with a lot of the stress that she was under during this time. Having her husband die, her son fighting a war, 2 of her daughters being held hostage, to her knowledge, and her son's best friend taking their family home and having 2 of her other sons go MIA. But with Theon staying loyal, the Iron Islands helping them and assaulting the Westerlands instead of the North, her sons are safe at Winterfell. I don't think she'll set Jaime free when the North is in a much better position for the war. So if she never frees Jaime, then the Karstarks won't lash out and kill the Squires, who honestly may not even be prisoners in this timeline since Theon managed to kill the Mountain unlike Edmure, who originally took the hostages after failing to kill Gregor. So Rickard won't be executed, his people will stay with Robb, and this further decreases his need to partner up with the Freys. He can continue marching south and facing the Lannisters on multiple fronts, while Walder Frey stews on it all because it's not like he's going to go march against Robb for vengeance or anything. And with the Stark campaign still going strong, I don't think Roose Bolton will be making any bold moves just yet. To add on with how good things are for the Starks right now, in the absence of a Red Wedding in this timeline, Arya would actually end up being reunited with her family. Remember, in canon, the Hound did manage to take her to the Twins where her family was when the Red Wedding occurred, but since that won't happen anymore, he'll be able to reunite them under better circumstances. This would be pretty huge for the Starks once they get Arya back because they'll know that the Lannisters and Littlefinger lied about having both the Stark girls in the capital the entire time. But even so, that doesn't mean that they're in any less danger. Sansa still needs to be saved from the Lannisters, and Robb wouldn't want Arya to follow them around during the war. So he'll arrange some men to take Arya back home, and if possible, I also think he convinced the Hound to stick around to go with her. Instead of fighting for his life against the Lannisters the entire time, Robb would offer him a place in the Stark household. It seems pretty fair, after all he did save his sister and bring her home. Not to mention, an enemy of the Lannisters might as well be a friend to them. So the Stark family is doing really well for themselves right now. That being said, without any more interference, Robb would definitely start making plans for an assault on King's Landing. After all, that was the whole point of getting Balon and his ships. With the Lannister forces divided, fighting him in the Riverlands and the Ironborn in the west, and the Mountain now dead, he would think that it's the perfect time to take the fight to Joffrey and free his sister. Theon would help him coordinate with his father Balon on a possible assault plan and make preparations for the move. But before they can get the plan underway, the Battle of the Blackwater happens. Stannis would have still killed Renly in this timeline thanks to blood magic and taking control of his forces, after which he would have assaulted the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. Like canon, I believe that the Tyrells will still support the Lannisters, even if Tywin Lannister has had it a bit rough with everything that's been going on with Robb and the Ironborn. Even though his territories are being raided right now, Casterly Rock isn't going to fall anytime soon to the Ironborn. Tywin is still very wealthy, and the Tyrells still want to make Marjorie queen, so they will help him against Stannis and later the Starks and Ironborn. This would become an issue for the North and Iron Islands, because with the Reach on their side, the Lannisters would find a way to get the Red Wine fleet involved, so they can fend off the Ironborn attacks in the west, and fortify King's Landing by sea in case Robb gets a bit bold. The Wolves and the Krakens would need a new game plan if they really plan on taking the capital from the Lannisters. And since Robb will be dying at any weddings for the time being, they may have some time to figure something out. But things will get a bit complicated for them when Jon starts asking for help with the Wall. Knowing how close Robb is with Jon, he definitely put his war effort on pause to go see about his brother and help him with what he needs. But outside of that, if the Greyjoys and Iron Islands had supported Robb during the war, their conflicts and bids for independence wouldn't have been so short-lived during the war. In fact, after the defeat of Stannis and the death of Robb, the war was basically over. While technically it was still going on with Stannis still alive, there was a really long lull in the conflict since no one poses a real threat to the Lannister-Tyrell alliance anymore. But with the Riverlands, Iron Islands, and North working together, and no big deaths on either side, it sets the foundation for a much longer conflict. But that's where I'm going to end the video for today. Hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell me your thoughts down below and what changes you might have made to this story. And I will see you all next time.